Greetings to everyone out there and welcome back to Around the Clock. First off, a huge shout out goes out to all of my subscribers out there as well as anyone tuning in and listening. Thank you all sincerely for all your support, guys. And today, we're going to step away from the usual Nintendo news videos and explore some Nintendo history. And guys, as you all can see in the title of this video, we're going to explore why Metroid for the Nintendo 64 was never created. Alright everyone, as we all know, there are many great Metroid games within the game's franchise, and one of them being Super Metroid for the Super Nintendo, released back in March of 1994, and Super Metroid is being considered by many until this date in 2019 to be the best Metroid game to ever be created. And as successful as Super Metroid was, we did not receive a follow-up game until Metroid Prime and Metroid Fusion in November of 2002. This was nearly a decade from 1994 to 2002 until Nintendo made another Metroid game in the franchise. Now this left the Nintendo 64 without a Metroid game representation on the system. This has raised many questions by Metroid fans over the years as to why Metroid for the Nintendo 64 was never created. But thanks to an old interview by Games Radar featuring Yoshio Sakamoto, the director of Super Metroid, he explains why Metroid N64 never saw the light of day. In the interview, Yoshio Sakamoto stated this, guys, and I'll quote, "I was actually thinking about the possibility of making a Metroid game for Nintendo 64, but I felt that I shouldn't be the one making the game. When I held the Nintendo 64 controller in my hands, I just couldn't imagine how it could be used to move Samus around. So for me, it was just too early to personally make a 3D Metroid. Nintendo at that time approached another company and asked them if they could make a Nintendo 64 version of Metroid, and the response was that no, they could not. They turned it down, saying that unfortunately they didn't have the confidence to create a Nintendo 64 version of Metroid, and that could compare favorably with Super Metroid. That's something I take as a compliment to what we achieved with Super Metroid." End quote. Now guys, there's a lot to take from this statement, and one thing that we do have to keep in mind that during this time between Super Metroid and the making of the Nintendo 64, there's a huge push between 2D and 3D. Not only did the Nintendo 64 do away with sprite animations in the favor of 3D polygons, it seemed that many game developers, including Yoshio Sakamoto, felt that the obligation to pursue 3D visuals suited the technology. Some pursuits of this 3D technology coming from the 2D animations that did well for Nintendo are, of course, The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time and Super Mario 64. And while these two legendary titles did extremely well converting from 2D to 3D animations, other titles didn't do so well for Nintendo. They include Donkey Kong 64, as well as Kirby 64, The Crystal Shards. While other third-party games such as Castlevania had mixed reviews and mixed criticism with the 3D to 2D aspect. Now, it's important to note that this was a time and an era where 3D games were going through some growing pains, guys. We had a lot of people considering that the 2D animations were preferred over the new 3D polygon textures. Now, as Yoshio Sakamoto stated, this is one of the reasons why Nintendo was so concerned that the Nintendo 64 version of Metroid could never stand up to the legacy of Super Metroid. And while the next Metroid game in the franchise, Metroid Prime, which is the first 3D Metroid game, achieved major success, and this major success was made possible by the fine work at Retro Studios, as well as the capabilities of the Nintendo GameCube, which was the next system in line of the Nintendo home consoles after the Nintendo 64. Creating 3D environments on the Nintendo 64 was made very difficult by the limitations at the time, and many gamers from this era acknowledge that many titles from the Nintendo 64 console haven't aged well graphically. One great example of this is GoldenEye 007. And GoldenEye 007 is a cult classic, a beloved game amongst many gamers including myself. But if we were to play GoldenEye 007 in modern day, we would notice the fuzzy textures and the blurred backgrounds. This is a complete 180 compared to the landscapes and the enemies from the original Metroid and Super Metroid. The enemies and the landscapes in these two games were very vibrant, they had very great 2D pixel animation, and creating a 3D world along the same lines would even intimidate the most creative programmers at the time. As I mentioned earlier at the beginning of this video, the Nintendo 64 was sort of a conversion system from 2D to 3D animations. And looking back in hindsight, we all can agree that even though this push was implemented from 2D to 3D, a 2D Metroid game could have still been created on the Nintendo 64 and still gain major success. One clear example of this being able to happen was the collaboration between PlayStation and Konami with the making of Castlevania Symphony of the Night. And Castlevania Symphony of the Night took ideas from the SNES, the original Nintendo console, and the Super Nintendo console, and applied them on the 5th generation console. This left fans wondering why Nintendo couldn't follow in the same footsteps as Castlevania Symphony of the Night and converted Metroid over to the Nintendo 64 while still keeping its 2D sprite animations. And although we did not receive an official Metroid game on the Nintendo 64, we did see Samus in a collaboration on the original Super Smash Bros. Game. Of course, we cannot forget about the Metroid Prime games, which debuted on the GameCube and continued on the Nintendo Wii. We also received on the Nintendo Wii Metroid Other M, which got mixed reviews due to the storyline and the camera angles within the first person view. Switching between the 2D and the first person view was kind of weird, guys. Now, we did get another skip in the generation of Nintendo systems with the Nintendo Wii U. We did not receive a Metroid game on the Nintendo Wii U, but most recently, we got Metroid returning to its 2D roots with some added 3D technology on the Nintendo 3DS with Metroid Samus Returns. And this was arguably one of the best Metroid games ever to be created. And although this was exclusively on the Nintendo 3DS and not on home consoles, many fans of the Metroid franchise agreed that this was a great return to the 2D aspect. Hopefully, with Nintendo's latest console, the Nintendo Switch, Metroid does not miss out on another home console as it did with the Nintendo 64 and the Nintendo Wii U, especially with the latest news of Metroid Prime 4 being delayed and being reworked from the ground up by Retro Studios themselves. Hopefully, we do get some official word on the Metroid Prime trilogy that is highly rumored to be heading to the Nintendo Switch. But as usual, guys, we'll just have to wait and see. Alright everyone, what are your all's thoughts on why Metroid for the Nintendo 64 was never created? Please let me know in the comment section below. As well as, if you like this video, make sure to hit that like button. If you're not already subscribed, be sure to hit that subscribe button as well as the notification bell so that you don't miss out on new, daily Nintendo news content here at Around the Clock, where here we focus on Nintendo gaming news around the clock. Catch you guys in the next one.